Hello everyone, and welcome to this video, which is in our Great Engine Game series. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler, and we're taking a look at another game between Leela-rofChade and redeployment in the TCEC Season 22 InfraFinal, and this is game 32. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great game, but I was a bit surprised that Mr. Beads, Leela's greatest fan, wasn't particularly impressed with it. But, well, you never know. Hopefully this video can make him change his mind. So how did the game start? So it was d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, and now a rather poor move, f5. It's yeah, it's a stone wall structure, so it's not so bad. But there's a couple of things in White's favour. I mean, first of all, White hasn't played this move g2 to g3. So the bishop isn't committed to g2, so it's not getting blocked by a stone wall structure with d5 and c6. The other nice thing is that the dark squared bishop isn't yet inside the white pawn chain, so it can come out to f4 and you know, target the e5 square and also target the queen side. And those two things together tend to give White a rather nice stable edge against stone wall structures. So knight f3, knight f6, bishop f4. And bishop d6 from black makes sense to you know, to challenge White's pressure against the queen side. The only thing is, of course, is that, you know, exchanging the dark squared bishops makes black position pretty static, really. You know, it's going to be hard to achieve anything on the dark squares once you've lost your dark squared bishop. But okay, you know, it's just not a great opening for black, really. So e3 played, which is, you know, very typical, very interesting. I mean, after bishop takes f4, e takes f4, this is known to be a slightly tricky structure for black. The e6 pawn is on the half-open file, and if you try and block with knight e4, we can always arrange f3 to kick away the knight. So there's always going to be pressure on the pawn. And, well, when you've got a light squared bishop on the board as well, it's tied down to the defense of the e6 pawn. Against redeployment in the reverse, Leela managed to get something clever where it took on c4, swapped off its light squared bishop for a knight, and then later gave up this pawn just for counterplay, you know, relying on the weaknesses in White's pawn structure and the fact that it had no passive pieces anymore with the exchange of the light squared bishop. But with a light squared bishop on, this is actually quite difficult. So castles was played, and now bishop takes d6 from White. Yeah, maybe a little bit early, you know, but obviously not a bad move either. I mean, black could play queen d6, which would, you know, kind of be my my preference, really. Bishop d3, bishop d7, castles was what Stockfish did against Koivisto in one of my engine games, and I think this was also what happened in the actual reverse here, redeployment against Leela. What redeployment did, and this was also quite a common reaction, also played by Koivisto, and this was to take with this pawn on d6. And it's, yeah, I mean, it looks a little horrific, but it does occur in quite a few black openings, and it can prove very, very solid. After c takes d5, e takes d5. Obviously the d5 pawn is weak, but this d6 pawn does cover the e5 square. And, well, you know, you've got these two pawns on d5 and f5, the typical Dutch ones, that give you a nice supported outpost on e4 for the black knight. And the fact that the c-file is half open, that might also give black some possibilities of bringing a knight into c4 as well. It's quite static, but black's got a lot of space, and actually d5 is not very easy to win at all. Looks like it should be, you know, sort of possible, but in practice not. So, yeah, I mean, these I've often seen, funnily enough, you know, these sort of structures being taken on by weaker players against grandmasters, and they just hold for ever and ever and ever. So I was quite intrigued to see how Leela did. Just got to show you one game that I played on my hardware, my 94 thread machine, Stockfish against Koivisto 8.0, because it was quite stunning. Koivisto took with a knight on d5, and then takes, bishop d3, and then swapped off the queens, queen d2. In principle, I wouldn't have thought this would really be a good idea, but Koivisto had the idea of playing f4, and yeah, just wants to you know, swap off the pawns and also free a little bit of activity for the light squared bishop. Feels a bit ropey to me, to be honest, but how Stockfish did it was incredible. Played e4, h6, e takes d5. So Koivisto just allowed it to take the pawn. I guess it was sort of worried about d takes e4, bishop takes e4, when this bishop is very active, also over here as well. So allowing white to have the pawns on d5. It's not great, but it because the black knight can't develop to c6, but at least this bishop doesn't have any activity in the center. So bishop f5 played, rook e1, takes, knight a6, rook e6, rook d8, rook c1, rook f7, king e4, knight c7. I mean, this was black's big idea. Move the knight round to c7 and, well, attack this pawn on d5. But Stockfish wasn't at all concerned about the rook on e6. That's not too difficult. I mean, takes, d5, king e5. This does look pretty great for white. But the next stop was quite nice. Knight g6 played. I mean, it's just the one thing that's difficult to see whether it really works or not is whether you can hold this e6 pawn, because the rook's got a few ways of attacking it, and it's not that easy to defend. So knight g6 played, f3, g4 rather, king h7, knight f4, rook fe7, king d5 and g5, and you sort of think, well, okay, this knight has to move away, the rook takes the pawn, and then, well, how bad is that for black? Probably not so bad. But Stockfish's idea was to play king e5, g takes f4, d5. And, yeah, this is really cool, isn't it? King in the center, advanced, pass pawns on e6, d5, and yeah, I mean, just very, very hard for black to do anything. If one of the rooks moves away, then the pawn advances, and well, we've got a lot of weak pawns that we can simply take, and then afterwards, move the rest of the kingside pawns. Yeah, I really like that idea. Somehow was really, really cool. So after c takes d5, Rothschild played e takes d5, and then we get some nice development, bishop d3, knight c6, and now Leela played. I mean, Leela's strategy really started getting nice from now on. I think again, I mean, an engine like Koivisto is super, super strong, but you do see, at times that that the top three, Komodo, Stockfish, Leela, they have something extra that that really sets them apart. And this next move was wonderful, really. It was a really great move. And this is knight g1. And yeah, when I saw it, it's one of those moves that well, when you see it, you understand it, but sort of to have the courage to do it somehow, it's takes a little bit. Also because there's some specific tactical things that you have to see as well, apart from having the bravery to play such a stupid-looking move. What is the idea? Well, there's many of them. The first thing is that this knight is being rerouted round to f4 to attack the pawn on d5, so putting pressure on the pawn on d5. The really nice thing about it, though, is that, well, we've already said that, one of the nice things of black having these pawns on d5 and f5 is that black gets this knight outpost on e4, and of course, with the knight on f3, then that's definitely very true. The knight on e4 is very annoying, and, well, I mean, actually, if you look at, what happened with Koivisto against Stockfish, then yeah, I mean, you see a number of situations where yeah, black gets a knight on e4, a knight on c4, and you just can't seem to get rid of it somehow. But knight g1, of course, gives you the opportunity to kick a knight on e4 away with f3. So already you're going to restrict the black activity. And, well, as Leela will show in the game, there's also the possibility just to break yourself in the centre with e4 and, yeah, just really open up the centre for your pieces. So, I mean, that's really, really nice. The one thing that I was wondering about, obviously the first thing that pops up into your head is how about a move like f4 here? Just, and after e takes f4, well, okay, knight d4, we've got this bishop h7 check trick, but something like queen b6 hitting b2 and d4. Well, it turns out that after knight e2, queen takes b2 castles. This is still very promising for white. I mean, I think the key problem for black is that, I mean, you play f4 in order to be able to activate this light squared bishop, but actually it doesn't have any paths really. I mean, bishop g4, we've got f3, g4, f5, you know, a very big wodge of pawns, you know, 4 pawns on the king side like that. And this bishop is just not getting any activity at all. So, you know, the fundamentals of the position haven't really changed. I'll just show you one game here between Stockfish against Koivisto. Note that Koivisto also beat Stockfish from this position, which is normally a good indication that it's a pretty tough one for black. So, a6, a4, knight takes d4. Obviously the idea, knight takes d4, queen c3. So bishop h7 check takes queen d4. Bishop f5, rook a2, queen b3, queen d1, swapping off queens, rook b8, rook d4. And then very soon after, we just got this advance of the kingside pawns. And yeah, I mean, I think, you know, if you ask me, I'd probably say this was a slight advantage for white. I mean, actually, Stockfish was already relaxing in its slippers, considering it was winning. Simply it understands, you know, it's quite hard for a human to understand that, you know, the activity that black's got is completely, you know, completely smotherable. So there's just nothing wrong with white's position at all. But yeah, I mean, it certainly looks good with all these weak black pawns and this big kingside pawn majority. So I mean, RofChade just played, I'd say, a quiet game. G6, knight h3, bishop e6, castles, h6, looking for g5 to block out the knight on h3. So queen f3 comes in. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really nice plan from Leela, and I don't think that my other engines were looking at this at all, which, you know, also makes it rather impressive. I mean, actually, you know, I think all these plans from time to time, you know, particularly Stockfish was picking up on a plan that Leela played, but for the most part, this is really more or less a Leela special, the way that this game was played, and it, you know, to me, it just seems really impressive. So queen f3, knight e7, knight f4, bishop f7, and now h4. And actually, what is Leela doing? Well, I mean, this queen is coming round to g3, and, you know, we are having all sorts of ideas with pressure against the black king side. And it also means that well, the queen's coming to g3 to free f2, f3 for white. And when e4 happens, then that's really going to open up lines against the king side. So, you know, putting the queen on g3, you're really combining beautifully with a knight on f4, knight on c3, bishop d3, the f3, e4 break. I mean, you really get the idea of just one huge plan taking place, you know, almost from move 10, actually. And well, I mean, I love games like that. I love thematic games like that. So yeah, this is why I like this one so much. So king g7 played, rook c1, always a good general idea. Bring all your pieces into the party. Just eye that c file. Rook c8, queen g3. So yeah, already little threats there. For example, after knight e4, takes, knight g6 was played by Stockfish against Koivisto. Knight g6, h5. Queen h4 takes, king g6. And the funny thing is that Stockfish already considered this position winning. It was just anticipating the exchange of rooks like this, and it had already calculated that this ending was winning. a6, g4 played, knight takes d5, we grab a pawn back, and then, well, the king and the knight just invade all over the place, all into the dark squares. Yeah, again, this is you know, this is the reason why you know, modern engines are just so strong. In particular, something like Stockfish that can evaluate endings so accurately at that distance. I mean, I'm sure you'd say that you know, as a human player, you'd say, yeah, this is probably pretty good for me. But yeah, you know, little things like the presence of double pawns here would, you know, maybe make you wonder a little bit. But for Stockfish, it's +6 already. So queen g3, a6 played by RofChade, f3, queen d7, rook c1. All the pieces are being brought into play, and again, you know, this is very purposeful play from Leela. Yeah, actually, both Koivisto and Stockfish really surprised me. They were playing b4 and then b5, you know, creating an extra weakness. It's true on the queen side, but also weakening this knight on c3, which, you know, is kind of feels like a sort of a rock in white's position. I mean, Leela simply played rook c1, and very straightforwardly, it's just threatening e3 to e4. And I mean, I think there's one important point here that, you know, I mean, I've played a lot of systems like this in these Queen's Gambit decline structures, you know, f3 and e4. But normally this pawn is back on c7. And it just means that when you play e4, then the d4 pawn is weak. And, you know, black also gets ideas like c5 to attack the centre. With a pawn on d6, yeah, you know, black's position really is completely static. So, you know, this sort of e4, that gives white dynamic advantages without really giving black any sort of counterplay against white's centre. And yeah, I mean, that really, I think, explains why the e4 break gives so much advantage in this position. So rook g8 played, e4, whack, and d takes c4, f takes c4, king h8. And essentially what RofChade is trying to avoid is giving white, you know, counterplay on. It's trying to avoid white getting enormous play on the king side by activating the pieces. For example, something like this is really very, very dangerous. I mean, we're already threatening, you know, ideas like knight h5 to f6, for example. So RofChade tries to keep it tight at the back, at least, you know, keep this diagonal a little bit closed. But now a lovely move again. You know, it's just it's not dramatic or anything, but you know, we had the queen on the g file whilst the king was on g7. The king moves back to the h file. We find another angle of attack, again something that's going to make the black king awkward. And well, if the black king comes to h7 to defend h6, then it's on the line of the light squared bishop. You know, it's just again, just beautiful, you know, subtle little play, pinpointing errors and just making it uncomfortable for black all the way. Rook e8, queen d2, rook g7, e takes f5. Surprised me slightly because there's this move g takes f5 for black. And just intuitively, you know, you do wonder, is this really a good idea? I mean, after all, there's the open g file for attack, and the rook is quite decent there. Curses, rook there, ha. And what we've also got is the pawn on h4, and that's the sort of thing that would make me think twice about this, because the pawn on h4 means that g3 is weak, you know, means that the king side is weak, and together with an open g file, not sure. But yeah, I mean, you know, Leela just judges this really well, that it's actually no problem at all. And knight d1 played, more beautiful knight moves. I mean, we've had knight g1, h3 f4, and now we're going to have knight d1 to e3, and you know, we're just attacking so many squares with these knights. So knight e4 was played, bishop takes e4, f takes e4, and now a very important idea. Rook takes e4 is possible, winning the pawn, but then we see black getting masses of counterplay here, takes, and here this king side really does make a difference. You know, I mean, we've got knight h4, knight g3, oops, knight g3, queen e4, we've got lots and lots of counterplay. But that's not white's idea at all. We just play knight e3. And we've seen this idea actually in King's Indian structures, often when black's got pawns on f5 and e4. But, you know, this knight blockading the pawn and just, well, killing a light squared bishop behind it. And actually, white's not interested in the e file at all. White's interested in the f file, because that's white's, and black's going to find it very, very difficult to get hold of it. Now again, you know, the thing that that amazes me a little bit is that you know, this g file pressure is worth so little. But rook f1, bishop e8, b3. That is a lovely move as well. It's what's the idea? It's just gaining space all over the board. So actually, white's just intending to go a4, and black won't be able to play bishop b5. You know, just beautiful, just making sure that this bishop is really, really killed. And another idea actually that's well worth pointing out is that, yeah, it hadn't really occurred to me, I have to say, that, you know, black's got this pressure on the g file, so you sort of think, oh, you know, keep it tight at the back. But actually, in many situations, for example, after rook c8, Stockfish was just playing g4 in this position, and actually using this g pawn as a sort of a battering ram. King h1, rook c8, queen e1, king g8, rook g2, rook f8, g5, and we go, you know, and the attack is already launched. So, yeah, I mean, white's got possibilities all over the board, and some of them are obvious, and some of them aren't, you know, and, well, you know, obviously it's the ones that aren't that are, you know, extremely impressive. So rook h7 played, black just waiting, basically, understanding that it can't do that much on the g file, so just waiting for an opportunity. And well, we get another beautiful, nice knight maneuver. I mean, this knight's done incredible work. It's gone here, 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 and now it's coming back round to c3 in order to attack the pawn on d5. And I mean, the other beautiful point about it is that this knight on f4 was great, but it was blocking the f file. When the knight moves to c3, then all of a sudden we've got the f-file ready for invasion. And actually, in principle, white would be happy swapping off the major pieces, queen, 2 rooks, and just leaving himself with an absolutely fantastic ending. So, that is a very big advantage for white there. So queen h3 played. I mean, these are the things that are difficult to judge humanly. Certainly, if you think move 31, you'd probably be in a bit of time trouble by now. But knight c3, and queen h4, knight takes d5. This looks a little bit scary somehow. It looks like your pieces are being disrupted, like there's counterplay. But yeah, I mean, actually, it's very, very hard for black to do something. And well, we've got quite a few moves coming in actually, which are really very unpleasant for black. It's this central control that white has that black doesn't have that makes all the difference. But it's just, difficult to really realize it or to be 100% sure about it as a human player. But if you just look at what happens, it's just black gets completely squashed here, and all of a sudden, from nowhere, just with the threat of knight forks and the bishop being chased away, black's just looks completely hopeless all of a sudden. Not easy to spot that that's what's going to happen. It's but after bishop c6, just defend the pawn on d5. We're still threatening queen h4. Still got a threateningly placed queen on h3, but it doesn't actually matter. I mean, white is simply going to go queen h7, knight e2, just going to look to swap some rooks, and well, black's attacking force will be whittled down, and eventually this queen will have to retreat. It's quite striking, really. So queen g3 played, a4, no rush, queen's on g3, but who cares? Just restricting this bishop. So can't go to b5, bishop d7, and now queen f2. And well, you're just threatening the exchange of queens. And if you go queen g7, I could go something like rook f7, for example. Other moves as well, but that's a very effective way of exchanging off major pieces. So queen f2 played, and then rook 1 f2, and bishop c6. So let's have a look at what we've got from this position. Well, I mean, white's position is absolutely fantastic in actual fact. I mean, we've got good possibilities of creating a pass pawn on the king's side. We've got these 2 pawns. This one will go to g4. We've got, this light square central pawn structure that, the black's pieces are really tied down to. This bishop on c6, very, very passive. This knight in particular is superb. It attacks the pawn on d5, but can also come f5 or g4, and then, from then on just, attack all sorts of dark squares. Another very nice point is that we've got this open f file in order to invade. And, the long-term thing, of course, is that we've got the dark squares, and, a king marching all the way through is not an impossibility. And it's not easy to see, where is black's counterplay really. It's white really has the possibility to make its position very, very safe. So next move was very nice. I like this too, b4. What's the idea? Well, you might be threatening b5 to chase away the pawn, but that's not really the idea. Rook c8, rook f6, h5, king h2. Just activating the king, elevating your position, as the famous book How to Play the Best Move in Any Sort of Position calls it. It's called the Capablanca technique, which involved elevating your position, just pushing it forwards towards the opponent. King g8, and now a5. And this is the nice thing. I mean, we had b3, a4 in the middle game to restrict the light squared bishop. But we're past the middle game now. There's no danger against the white position. So now we switch to restricting the black queen side, tying it right down, and probably we're just going to end up doing something slightly different with this knight now. It's just this very subtle reaction to the prevailing situation on the board. Restraining when restricting pieces basically in the middle game phase with b3 a4, and then restraining pawns in the end game phase with b4 a5. Very, very nice. So after rook e8, knight e2, we're coming round again now. We're looking at g3, we're looking at f4. In the meantime, black has played this move h5, had to do it in order to be able to move the rook somewhere. So yeah, the knight's great on e2. It's coming round to the square it was occupying before. We've got a rook in front of it, so the f-file's already taken, and we're going to be attacking a pawn on h5 on top of it. So glory days. King g7, knight g3, rook h8, king g1. Not quite sure why. Well, it's sort of a waiting move, waiting for black to weaken its position. Bishop a4, and then rook d6, hitting the pawn on d5. And this is where the engines start getting desperate and start giving away material, hoping to create a bit of activity. But rook h7, knight gf5, king f7 takes check, takes, and rook f6. And this is still very, very powerful. And you just notice, that the knight that white exchanged was the other one, not the knight that's doing the fantastic blockading job, keeping black's e-pawn passive. It was the other one, and well, now the rooks are coming in. Rook f7, rook fe6, king f8, rook h6. Lovely, unhurried play, actually. Not rushing with an exchange and a grabbing of pawns. Really understanding that those pawns are ripe for the picking, and that they'll fall at whatever moment white wants. And this is just very good technique. Bishop c6, rook h5. King e7, rook h6, king f8, h5. No need to do anything crazy, just g4, rook h7. And the nice thing about g4 is that it gives a great outpost for the knight on f5. Rook d7, rook f6, king there, knight d6 check, and here RofChade gave the exchange up. But the game didn't last much longer after that. I love this game, I really do. Not a spectacular, but I think the this first knight maneuver, knight to g1, really showed excellent understanding of what black had in the position, this outpost on e4, and also came up with a way to avoid that. But then the whole way that the plan linked together, with queen f3 to g3, linking all these pieces together against the black king side. And then this this break with f3 and e4, and I thought that Leela just played very, very directly here, which I wasn't really seeing that much in the games that I played between my engines, and yeah, just very, very powerful, and then it carries on, and there's more nice knight maneuvers. So knight d1 to e3, not even taking a pawn, and then the knight comes e2 to c3. And then, this little idea of a b3 a4, restrict pieces in the middle game, and then shifting up to restricting pawns with b4 a5 in the end game. And then, another knight maneuver coming back, hitting a new target that was made, that black had to make. It's a lovely, beautiful positional play, and I really think we can learn a lot from that. It's the sort of game you could see Karpov or Carlsen playing. They do this against human opponents regularly, but of course RofChade is just a little bit stronger than any human opponent, so it's doubly impressive when a smooth game is played like this one. So there we are. I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you've learned a lot from it, and you can apply some of these techniques in your game. It's not complicated engine tactics stuff. This is really something that we can learn from. It's understanding where to put your pieces in a certain structure. So why not give the video a like or subscribe to the channel? Otherwise, take a look at my new book, The Silicon Road to Chess Improvement, which I still think is really, really good. And otherwise, thanks very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you at the next one. Thanks for watching.